In 1998, in a small village in East Java, there was an old house known as the Empty House. This house stood at the edge of the village, surrounded by towering bamboo trees. No one dared to approach it, especially after dusk. The house had been abandoned for decades following a horrific tragedy. The villagers often heard strange noises coming from inside the house, cries of a woman, footsteps, or the sudden creaking of doors. Yet no one dared to find out what truly happened there. That was until a young man named Bayu, a newcomer to the village, experienced something he would never forget. Bayu, a man in his 20s, had recently moved to the village to help his uncle, Mr. Sardi, manage a farm. Being a city boy, Bayu didn't believe in the mystical stories often told by the villagers. To him, it was all just folklore, meant to scare children. One night, Bayu worked late in the fields. Instead of taking the longer main road, he decided to use a shortcut that passed by the empty house. His uncle had warned him, "Don't go that way, Bayu, it's not a good place, especially at night." Bayu chuckled, "Oh, Uncle, I don't believe in such things. It's just an empty house." With a small flashlight in hand, Bayu walked along the narrow, dark path. The night was eerily quiet. Only the sound of crickets and the soft rustling of leaves in the wind accompanied him. As he approached the empty house, an unsettling feeling crept over him. The air grew cold, and a sharp metallic scent, like blood, filled his nostrils. Bayu paused, feeling uneasy, but his curiosity urged him to move closer. From inside the house, he heard a woman crying, a soft, heart-wrenching sob. "Who's there?" Bayu called out loudly. There was no reply, only the crying grew clearer. The large old door of the house was slightly ajar, as if inviting Bayu inside. Cautiously, Bayu approached the door. He shone his flashlight into the dark interior of the house. The walls were covered in moss and cracks. The wooden floor creaked under his steps. But what stood out most were the strange markings on the walls, symbols or ancient writings he couldn't understand. The crying came again, this time from upstairs. A chill ran down Bayu's spine, but his curiosity outweighed his fear. He climbed the rickety wooden stairs, each step echoing through the house. At the top, he saw a room with a partially open door. His flashlight illuminated the inside, and there he saw something that made his blood run cold. A woman sat with her back to him, her long hair cascading to the floor. She wore a white dress stained with red spots that looked like blood. "Excuse me, do you need help?" Bayu asked, his voice trembling. The woman didn't respond and continued crying. Suddenly, she stopped. The silence was deafening. Slowly, she began to turn toward Bayu. Her face was pale, with black, empty eyes. Her mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide smile, almost reaching her ears. Bayu stepped back, but the woman stood up and began walking toward him. Her movements were slow, yet every step filled Bayu with dread. As she drew closer, he noticed something horrifying. Her hands were covered in wounds, like claw marks, and a noose hung loosely around her neck. Bayu screamed and bolted down the stairs. He ran to the front door, but it slammed shut with a loud bang. He tried desperately to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The woman's cries had now turned into a sinister laugh, echoing throughout the house. Just as Bayu was about to give up, the door suddenly opened on its own. Without a second thought, he sprinted outside. There he encountered Mr. Hassan, a village elder who happened to be passing by. "What's wrong, Bayu? You look pale," Mr. Hassan asked. Gasping for breath, Bayu recounted what had happened. Mr. Hassan shook his head and murmured, "That's Naya Sarmi. Her spirit hasn't been at peace since that tragedy." Mr. Hassan then told Bayu the tragic story of Miss Sarmi. She was a young wife who lived in the house with her husband. Her husband had died in a mysterious fire that consumed the house. Unable to bear the grief, Miss Sarmi hanged herself in the upstairs room. The villagers believed her spirit still haunted the house, searching for her lost husband. From that night on, Bayu's life was never the same. At his uncle's house, he often heard footsteps on the roof at night. Sometimes he saw the silhouette of a woman standing outside the window, even though the house was surrounded by fields with no neighbors nearby. The nightmare reached its peak a week later. That night, Bayu was playing guitar in the living room. Suddenly, the lights went out. In the darkness, he heard a whisper in his ear. "You've seen me. Don't forget me." Bayu dropped his guitar and ran out of the house. He decided to sleep at a neighbor's house that night. Eventually, Bayu chose to leave the village. However, his story was passed down by the villagers as a warning to anyone daring enough to approach the empty house. Many local believe Miss Sarmi's spirit still waits for someone to keep her company. And for those who have seen her, her spirit will haunt them wherever they go.